Lindsay, would you like to begin with an introduction of yourself and your organization? I think I can unmute you. There we go. And you, yeah.
Oh, perfect. I think, can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Hi, I'm so excited to be talking to y'all. My name is Lindsay Linder. I am the senior policy attorney at the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition. And my pronouns are she, her. And this is a little bit, I'm originally from Louisiana. I live in Austin now. That's where our organization is predominantly based. But Texas, that's Texas. And it's a little bit full circle for me because when I was in law school, I got to do an internship with UNICEF where I helped draft Israel's implementation on a UN treaty, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And so one of my first policy jobs essentially was working with kind of UN policy work. So I'm super excited to be talking to y'all, and yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Cynthia, would you like to do the same? I think I allowed you to unmute yourself, so you can try doing
that. Okay. Hi, my name is Cynthia Simons. I'm TCJC's first ever Grant Me the Wisdom Women's Policy Fellow. I'm originally from Dallas, but I've lived in Austin for quite a time. All of my family, though, is located in Dallas. My children are here with me in Austin. My mother is in Alaska, so she's traveling around the world. Texas born.
Great, thank you so much. So I wanted to begin, I know you briefly said this, just like with a conversation about what the goals of your organization and your work is.
I'll go ahead and take that one. TCJC advances solutions and builds coalitions to end mass incarceration and foster safer Texas communities. In our vision, in all Texans live in safe, thriving communities where incarceration is rare and every person has the opportunity to succeed. We accomplish this through state and local policy reform, meaning we fight for laws to be passed or sometimes not passed at the state legislature, and we help local communities make informed policy decisions. For example, thwarting the construction of a new women's prison in Austin. We conduct research, produce educational materials, host events, and lobby lawmakers and local officials in support of justice reform. TCJC also coordinates a Texas Women's Justice Coalition of formerly incarcerated women and advocates from across the state. The idea behind the coalition is to build an infrastructure of peer support and expertise so tight that it can support any system impacted woman needing support, whether that be with housing, peer support, information about advocating for reform, or any barrier that they may come across that is impeding on their ability to succeed. We want to help them support and provide resources to move them along their way.
Great, thank you for that explanation. And because we want to focus on the current events and current environment and how COVID-19 has been affecting all of us, I was wondering if you could talk about how COVID-19 has affected the communities that you work with specifically. Can you, is it working?
There we go, yes. So yeah, this is a really big and important question. COVID-19, this pandemic has really impacted everyone. But one of the hardest hit communities has really been people who are incarcerated. Texas has the highest number of COVID cases and deaths among prisoners of any prison system in the country. And the rate of cases in Texas's prisons is 762% higher than in Texas's overall population. And the rate of deaths is about 250% higher than the rate of deaths amongst Texas overall. So the prison facilities are really getting hard hit by the pandemic. This doesn't include deaths or cases amongst the staff of the prison facilities, which is also a problem right now. And particularly when we think about women, they are the less visible victims of COVID-19 behind bars, as they are so often overlooked in this criminal justice system that was not designed for them. though a relatively small number of incarcerated women have died in Texas, their stories really illuminate the unique problems that women face in prison. And they also reflect a lot of the all too common ways that women get into the criminal justice system in the first place. So just to share really quickly about that. So the vast majority of women in Texas prisons, about 81% are mothers. Many were raising kids on their own before being locked up, and measures to slow the virus behind bars, including eliminating prison visitation and restricting access to phone calls and things like that, have really cut off communication to their children and families on the outside. And most units have been on some form of lockdown and had no visitation since April. And so this has just really exacerbated the problems that are already there. As Cynthia mentioned, we coordinate a women's justice coalition of formerly incarcerated women and advocates, and many of our members have become increasingly concerned about the conditions inside of Texas prison facilities for women right now. And I can share a few tidbits of some of the information that we're getting. So many of the women have written about really deplorable conditions, particularly in terms of the food that they're receiving. So we had reports of, no hot meals, a complete lack of vegetables and fresh food. One woman cited that the only hot meal that they were given was a fried corn dog that was placed on the floor of her cell, not even on a plate or a napkin or anything like that, like literally just placed on the floor of her cell, despite the fact that their cells aren't currently being cleaned at all. And many women wrote in about, obviously not having any contact with the outside world, not being able to write their families because they're having trouble accessing commissary, which is where they're able to buy stamps. And they're also having trouble accessing feminine hygiene products because they need to access commissary for that as well. And one woman wrote about guards not wearing the state issued masks or wearing them at their chin. They have had concerns about just movement in general, as they've been really confined to really small cubicles, except for restroom trips with little to no recreation. So really a whole host of issues that we've been hearing. And we've been working with our allies and state leadership to see some of these things addressed, and we have seen some progress. For a while, they were allowing for a small number of free phone calls, which is great because visitation is completely prohibited right now. So if you don't have money for a phone call, then you're looking at no contact. And so they've been trying to work with us on more access to phone calls. Also, there was a great story by Carrie Blackinger, who's actually a formerly incarcerated woman who writes she was with the Houston Chronicle, now she's with the Marshall Project, but she does incredible reporting on Texas prison conditions. And she did a big expose on the food for both men and women in Texas prisons. And since then, there have been improvements in that area. They're trying to get some vegetables, trying to get some hot meals. But we recognize that this is we need a system for more regularly hearing from women inside about the conditions that are happening in their units. And so we are starting a project called Warriors from Within that Cynthia is going to be heading up, wherein incarcerated women are going to be able to report to us every month, provide detailed information about the conditions in their units. And this is going to help us monitor implementation of bills that we've passed, and also help us identify ongoing issues, and help us keep in regular contact with the true CJ reform experts, which are those people who are currently incarcerated.
Thank you for that answer. Yeah, that sounds very frustrating. And so what I'm hearing is that these issues, like the food issues and things like that, that was happening before COVID too, and it's been exacerbated by COVID, or has most of these issues appeared since the past couple of months?
Yeah, I think the answer is both. I think to some degree these things have existed. The conditions of confinement are really abysmal and kind of have always historically been. But there are some that have been really exacerbated by COVID. So, for example, the food, a huge part of the reason why they don't have hot meals right now is because they're being served in their cells rather than being able to go to the cafeteria and stuff like that. So the food is always terrible in the prison system, like always, but it's even worse now because there's essentially no hot food, no vegetables, no fresh food items. They're getting the food is worse than its normal boundary of terribleness. And obviously, visitation, there's never enough visitation, particularly for folks who have minor children. There's just never enough visitation. But right now there's no visitation, right? So it's just exacerbated the problems that are already there. Yeah.
And so you already touched on the problems that are unique to women in these situations, and not just, and that men don't necessarily have to face as harshly. And I was wondering if you could expand on how things like sexism, the gender differences, homophobia, and racism intersect and manifest in the prison system.
Definitely. So, um, I think there's a really great story, um, a really terrible, tragic story, but it really illuminates a part of the question that you're asking. So, we're at the 5-year anniversary of Sandra Bland's death in here in Texas. And for those who don't know, this was a tragedy that began as a traffic stop in Waller County, Texas, and a woman of color lost her life because of a racist and overreaching criminal justice system. And we recently, so basically on the 5-year anniversary of that, we had tragedy strike again. Another woman of color, Andrea Circle Bear, who was a citizen of the Cheyenne-Saw River tribe. She was transferred from her home state of South Dakota to a federal prison in Texas. And she was 8 months pregnant when she arrived at the Fort Worth prison. And within a few days, she was taken to the hospital with pneumonia-like symptoms that turned out to be COVID-19. And the following day, hospital staff called her grandmother to tell them that she was on a ventilator and that the baby had been delivered by emergency cesarean section. And Andrea died 3 weeks later, never getting a chance to hold her baby. And I think that Andrea's story, it's a great place to start when we talk about how sexism and misogyny really impacts the criminal justice system. So she had been sentenced to 2 years as part of a plea deal for quote unquote maintaining a drug involved house. Before she was reported to prison, her family wrote letters to a federal judge letting them know about the fact that she had 5 children, that she was pregnant, and they begged the judge to consider sentencing her to serve out her term closer to her home in South Dakota. At the time, she was going through a divorce. She was heartbroken. She tried to access drug treatment close to home, but no beds were available. And her death could have been avoided because there's absolutely no evidence that putting her behind bars is an asset to public safety, doesn't promote public safety in any way. And now not only is public safety not improved, and we've spent a lot of tax dollars on unnecessary incarceration, but we've actually taken a mother away from a newborn baby who needs her, as well as her other children. And we've been fighting in Texas for a law to pass that would require judges to consider if a person has minor children that are depending on them, they would consider alternative placements to someone to go into prison or jail. But we haven't been able to pass that law yet because of what I believe is misogyny. There's such a blame and a shame put on women, especially women who are mothers, whenever they step out of line. And if a woman is coming into contact with the criminal justice system, she has, in somebody's view, right, stepped out of line. And I think that, like, from the get-go, they face so much shame and blame and misogyny, and they're met with unnecessary harshness that is really devastating to families and communities. And there's an amazing group called Forward US, and they advocate for criminal justice reform, and they conducted research on women serving really lengthy prison sentences for relatively minor crimes. And they found that in many cases, the women are not actually doing the crimes that they're convicted of. They're with a partner or a family member who is, and they're in the same house or car where drugs are found, right? And we see this in the stories of the women that we work with all the time. Texas has something called the law of parties, which is basically an overly broad conspiracy and accomplice law, and it allows someone to be held accountable for someone else's behavior. And we see this used against women all the time. And this directly intersects with race as well. And, I think that that's absolutely the case with Andrea Circle Bear. And we just see it over and over again that a lot of times frankly, the men in women's lives kind of are what bring them into contact with the criminal justice system. And we even have cases where women are criminalized because of defending themselves. They're, criminalized where really they should be getting like self-defense for standing their ground or defending themselves against a batterer. And so I think all of that has so much misogyny and sexism baked into it. And then when we talk about homophobia, I just think I want to mention really quickly, I know this is a little bit long-winded, but these are such big questions. But when we talk about homophobia, I think the one thing that I would really, really be amiss if I didn't mention is that Texas detains people based on their biological sex, regardless of whether that is how they identify. So trans Texans are subject to incredibly dangerous and dehumanizing conditions while detained. And that's on top of the fact that they're more likely to be arrested in the first place due to discrimination, right? So again, this is just the system operating exactly as it's intended, which is to, dehumanize and punish and discriminate.
Yeah, and thank you. And I know I'm giving you really broad, like really big questions to answer that I know we can't really necessarily answer. And so I guess, so building on these problems, what reforms are your organization pursuing, and like what progress have you made in the things that you've been talking about? And I also wanted to make sure, Cynthia, are you able to unmute? Because I know I muted you at some point. Just because I want to make sure everything's working. Okay, let me try one more time. Try now. Great.
Okay.
To make sure.
Very good. Yeah, so sorry. So the question is like, what reforms are we working towards?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, so I think specifically when we talk about women's justice, we had a really, so in Texas, the legislative session only lasts for 5 months every 2 years. So it's a really short window of time that we can pass state level reform. And so we really try to take advantage of that time frame. So in our most recent legislative session, we were able to pass, we had a whole host of bills that we called like dignity legislation. And we were able to pass almost all of them. We passed 8 bills, which for the Texas legislature is a really high number. It's really designed to kill bills and makes it really difficult to pass legislation. And so we were super, super enthusiastic about being able to pass 8 bills. A couple of them really quickly that we worked on. One was a comprehensive bill that required the Texas prison system to implement a whole host of provisions that would improve conditions for incarcerated women. So this included requiring trauma screenings upon intake to determine if women had significant histories of trauma, which, spoiler alert, almost all of them do. Training for correctional officers, limits on invasive body cavity searches, restrictions on shackling, particularly for pregnant women, and expanded use of free feminine hygiene products, which was a huge issue here in Texas. And so that was like one of our omnibus conditions of confinement bills that we were able to pass. We also passed bills that would have improved conditions for women at the county level. So in our county jail system, which is where a huge portion of incarcerated women are, and that would do a lot of those same things, improve conditions for pregnant women, improve access to feminine hygiene products and things like that. And then another one that I'll just mention really briefly was in Texas, in the prison system, women have access to drastically less educational and vocational programming than their male counterparts. So men have access to more than double the programming that women have access to. And as of this past legislative session, women had access to up to an associate's degree in the prison system, and men had access to associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, and master's degrees. And that's just one example of the disparity in educational and vocational programming that exists in the system. And so we passed legislation that basically requires TDCJ to implement policies and practices that will promote women's access to, increased access to vocational and educational programming, life skills, substance use treatment, rehabilitation, all of that. Because when it comes time for parole eligibility or for release, women are at a disadvantage if they haven't had access to the same types of self-betterment that men have had access to, right? So they've definitely made progress in that area, and we're glad. There's still so much that needs to be done, but they're definitely taking steps in the right direction. And another part of that bill was increasing peer support services for that way that formerly incarcerated people can be more involved in the mentorship and rehabilitation of people who are currently incarcerated, because they're absolutely the most effective champions, and they're the ones that can be most in people's lives that are, going through something that they can relate to so strongly. And obviously, Cynthia is a peer expert. Oh, sorry. Oh, there we go. Okay. Cynthia is a peer support expert. So obviously she knows a lot about that and can talk about that as well. But I wanted to share just because Cynthia is quite new on our team. And so she has learned a tremendous amount about our initiatives, but I didn't want to put the pressure on her to remember everything that we passed before she was on our team. So yeah, that's why I wanted to share that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I wanted to, and people have been asking really good questions in the chat, and I do want to get to those. But I did want to ask about if most of your work is local and state, or like can your work expand past that, and is there a global perspective to this work that you're doing?
Okay, so currently TCJC's work is limited to Texas. However, we are constantly collaborating with national organizations and advocates to support their efforts, to have them support our efforts. And we would love to collaborate more globally with other organizations. We're all about bringing people up and aligning our missions. And if the two missions are conducive to benefiting the women and fighting for rights and justice, then we're all supporting of that.
Awesome. Yeah, of course. And I know because I know we have such a global audience here, and I know that the issue of criminal justice and prison reform and crime, like what is considered punishment versus rehabilitation, is something that is so prevalent, like in all the countries in the world. So that's why I wanted to bring that up. And a good question that has been mentioned by Jen in the chat, thank you so much, is about like the mental health of women inside of prisons, and how does your organization work towards addressing that? Like, how is the mental health for women? How might it compare to men, like the resources they have access to? And then how has COVID maybe changed the ability of you to be able to fix that and work towards that? I know it's a big question. Can we, sorry, unmute.
There we go. No problem. I actually know Jen Toon, so I'm peeping. I see her in the comments. She's actually an incredible women's justice reform advocate, and she is just an awesome collaborator and somebody that we really value in this space. So she could probably answer that question as good as anybody. But I will say that I think of absolutely. The prison system is no place for mental health treatment, and it's actually, the conditions of confinement are really conducive to create a mental health crisis and exacerbate any mental health issues that are there. And so yeah, I think that it's one of the key things that we need to do. In addition to, I think it's so important to improve conditions. I know that anything we can do to make the lives of women who are currently in the system more bearable is really important. But we also are recognizing that it is so important, maybe more important, to be working to prevent women from ever going into the system where it's not necessary, right? So many of the women in Texas prison systems, 64% of women who are incarcerated in Texas right now are there for nonviolent, predominantly drug-related offenses. Those are things that should be dealt with in the community, public health response. It is not something that justifies incarceration, in my belief. And so I think, to think that we could take 64% of the female prison population, which is it's about 12,500 women, 64% of that's thousands and thousands of women who just don't need to be in the system. They don't need to be incarcerated. So I think that definitely we need to do more to improve conditions of confinement and mental health treatment and all of that. But we also just need to be fighting for, in my opinion, we need to be elevating more of an abolitionist perspective, where we're really thinking about how can we build a community that we don't need to rely on incarceration in the way that we have always been using it, right? Because frankly, I mean, what we've seen with Sandra Bland, with Andrea Circle-Bear, like, it is killing people, and people who were never a threat to public safety, never. And so I think we really need to start shifting how we think about the people that we're incarcerating and what we think deserves a criminal justice carceral response. And I think mental health is, for me, right at the top of the list of things that we need to absolutely be dealing with in the community. I mean, our prisons and jails have become our de facto mental health institutions, and it is costing us, in terms of public safety, it is costing us massive amounts of taxpayer dollars, and it's really destroying people's lives.
Right, exactly. And thank you for bringing that up. I wanted to go back to what you were talking about with Sandra Bland and Andrea Circle-Bear. And I wanted to talk about how the recent, I know that the Black Lives Matter movement is not recent in terms of its like development, especially I remember it started about when I was in like ninth grade a few years ago, but it's become definitely to the forefront of the surface this past summer. I know a lot of young people are focusing on helping with the movement and calling to defund the police and the prison system. So I was wondering if you could talk about how this recent push to not just reform the criminal justice system, but defund it, abolish it, has affected your work or your goals and how that's looking.
So I think the biggest shift has been that the visibility and, for the lack of a better term, the popularity for the injustices within our criminal justice system. Essentially, this movement has given criminal justice reform a more publicized and broader platform, which changes everything from the amount of funding that is being invested in the justice system, reform, to the political will of lawmakers to pass policies. And that would help support communities and dismantle the prison industrial complex altogether. We often refer to our broken justice system when the truth is it's operating exactly as it was intended to do so. Our country, founded by genocide against indigenous people and built on the backs of Black people, has an inherent legacy of violence. Police brutality is one symptom of this legacy, but it's far from the only one. Police, prosecutors, judges, and correction systems carry out state-sanctioned violence regularly. Our justice system has done what it was meant to do: commit violence overtly, implicitly, and repeatedly.
Thank you. That's exactly right. And I'd love if you could expand for us maybe like what it could look like to not have the criminal justice system as we know it. I know we haven't like figured that out yet, and that's why we're working towards it. But like, what would it look like to not have prisons, to not have what we're all used to?
It would probably look a lot more like rehabilitation. It would look a lot more like investing into our communities and grabbing these young ladies and these young men as early as middle school and giving them educational opportunities that are not afforded to them in the communities in which they live in simply because they were birthed to a certain zip code. It would look like treating mental health. It would look like treating substance abuse disorder. It would look like getting down to the fundamentals of what is wrong with these people and trying to help them so that they can be prosperous people in our communities and that they can then pass these on to their children. So it will be a generational impact of positivity, uplifting, knowledge, coping skills, tools added to their toolbox so that society as a whole will function better instead of based off of punitive punishment.
And so building off of someone in the Jen in the chat said talking about the three-prong approach before, during, and after incarceration, and Abriel from Girl Up Beoape, I believe that's in Mexico, asked like how the discrimination and taboo for a woman after incarceration and when they're released into society. So I was wondering if you could talk about how the system that we have set up, does it support people coming out of the criminal justice system, specifically women, and how that affects their mental health, their physical safety, and all this that comes with it?
It affects it in many different ways, and it really affects the basics that you need to survive. If your mind is not healthy and being fed in a positive manner, then you can't clearly think, you can't clearly make good choices. You come out of prison, and now not only do you have the discriminatory practices that have been happening as a woman, but you also have the stigma attached to you that you are a felon, that you are a criminal. So housing is not affordable to you. You're denied housing in lots of places. Your job, you're not able to get gainful employment. You're not able to even go to school and get certain certifications and licenses so that you can become a stable and secure provider. And like Lindsay stated earlier, 81% of these women are mothers. So you're taking these mothers after you have criminalized them, and then you're bringing them back into society, and you're saying, we're not going to address your mental health needs. We're not going to give you a fair shot at housing. We're not going to give you a fair shot at the job market, and we're not even going to give you a fair shot at education. But we still have the expectation that you raise these children and you make them healthy, functioning people in society. They're just not given a fair shot. They're not given the resources that they need, that funds are available and should be allocated to them. It would cost the government a lot less money to put money into our community than it does to run these prisons.
Absolutely. And I would just add to what Cynthia shared that, for me, it's easy as thinking about, like, when we talk about abolition versus kind of the status quo of the prison industrial complex, for me, it's as easy as thinking about, are we going to be reactive or are we going to be proactive? And right now we have a criminal justice system that is reactive, and it is costing us in every way. It's costing us in community infrastructure. It's costing us in human capital and human potential. It's costing us fiscally. And it's just not making us safer. It's like it's draining all of our resources and giving us poor results. And so it's like, for what? We have this massive system, and for what? Nobody is really benefiting except for the people who profit from incarceration. And that's, not the vast majority of us, right? And so I think it's just shifting to a mentality of like, what can we do that can address the root causes of what brings people into contact with the system? And how can we shift to being more preventative? And I think that, like, it's really just shifting that framework to, like, are we going to really support communities so that they can be resilient and do everything we can to prevent crime and violence from happening in the first place? Or are we just going to react when crime happens? And frankly, it happens because we have intentionally divested communities of the resources that they need to be successful. Crime and violence are fostered from just a lack of community support. So we've taken away mental health treatment. We've taken away drug treatment. We've, left communities, particularly communities of color, particularly Black communities, have been really, really intentionally divested in and oppressed in a way that has really set them up so much for failure. And then we punish them disproportionately harshly when they fail, right? And so I think it's just shifting to, like, how can we ensure that communities, because all communities need is for us to not be, not have our foot on their neck, right? Like, not be actively oppressing them and actively giving them these, pits of quicksand to fall into, right? So if we really just let communities be, we give them the base resources that they need to thrive, communities will develop resiliency, and they will, like, trauma recovery centers are one of the things that is developed in communities across the country. They're really helping to address the root causes of crime and violence without having to use the criminal justice system as a go-to, right? And I think that that's one of many, many things that can exist. But more than anything, it's just like, it sounds so silly to just say, like, supporting communities, but that's really all it is. We just have to support communities to set themselves, like, if we support communities, they really naturally will set themselves up to thrive. Like, they know how to do that if we're not actively oppressing them and divesting resources from them and discriminating against them and over policing them. It really is something that it's not so far-fetched to think about a world where we don't have to rely on prisons and jails in the way that we do. It's no other developed nation has a criminal justice system like this. Is not natural. It's not normal. And it wasn't always that way even here in the United States, although we have such a history, of course, of violence and atrocities, particularly against people of color. We didn't use the criminal justice system as we know it today before really the rise in war on drugs and, starting in the 80s, the really, like, huge uptick in criminal justice. There, probably more people in the Harris County jail incarcerated than there were in the entire country in, like, 1975, right? So it's just like, we have just built this incredible problem, and it's not a normal thing. The normal thing is to not have what we have right now, right? And so I think, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, I'll say, is one of my favorite abolitionists, and she's got some amazing literature. I absolutely cannot do this justice. I would really encourage you to maybe check out some of her content, articles that she's written. She wrote a book about the California prison system called Golden Gulag, and she really shifted my whole worldview when it comes to thinking about abolition and crime prevention and stuff, and she's really amazing. So Ruth Wilson Gilmore, I highly recommend.
And yes, I appreciate these resources and would love to hear more. I sent you had sent me a video of the work that TCJC does with women's justice, and I did send that out to our participants beforehand. And after this, we can be sure to send out resources that if you were interested in learning more and taking more action, you can read or watch or whatever it is. We also have our website that Shara put into the chat has a page that's like a blog, and it serves as a resources page. So we've been updating it with resources from our different panels and things like that. So feel free to keep adding resources, and we will put them in so that everyone can see them. So I wanted to go to something that someone said in the chat. Lawana said, "I'm so happy that I didn't miss this. Thank you all. I've been looking for trusted sources in this space, incarcerated women and their experiences while Black, Brown, pregnant, LGBTQIA+, and other intersections. Please dump it all on me so that I can continue my research towards my aim of producing a report that will proliferate greater support for gender-specific services for justice-involved women." And so on that note, what can we do to support your goals? What can regular people, what can students do to take action alongside you?
Be a part of the hard conversations. Inform those people who are unaware and get actively involved in the movement if you feel it's the right thing to do. Before you discredit or judge someone or a person's situation, make sure that you have all the details, that you have all the facts surrounding it. Vote. Follow TCJC on social media, donate to social justice organizations, and just stay very much involved, and don't let someone else do the thinking for you. If somebody is casting out a negative view or trying to discredit something that you've been told, research, do your own educating for yourself, and don't allow the people that are trying to mislead you and not be transparent in what is actually happening in the criminal justice system towards women and Black people. Don't let that fall go over your eyes.
And I love what somebody said in the comments about like basically surrounding themselves with trusted sources. I think that that is one of the best things that we all can do to help just make sure that we're constantly being challenged and educated, and you know, that the right people are kind of shaping our perspective and pushing us in the right direction. So I would say, yeah, like if you, Cynthia and I are super available. If you want to reach out and want to know kind of how to plug in, like we're so happy to do that. But also, like if you are interested and you want to email me, just to say like, hey, send me 5 people that I should be following. I would love to send you some recommendations on people that I think, like the people who I follow on Instagram and on Twitter are so to credit for so much of the, so much of what I know, so much of what I'm passionate about, and the different kind of rabbit holes I go to. They lead me in the right direction all the time. And I feel like just following like 5 really good social justice driven, like folks who are committed to intersectionality and are sit at that crux of like accountability and kindness, right? Like really has just been such a gift to me in my journey towards becoming an abolitionist and talking about how I can help be a part of pulling apart the status quo and everything. So anyway, if you really are interested in this stuff, please feel free to reach out to Cynthia or I anytime. Follow us on social media, whatever makes sense for you. And we would love to, answer any questions always. We're just super happy to be available as resources. And honestly, you're doing the right thing by just being a part of this conversation today. I'm so grateful that we were able to speak to y'all. And I think like you were definitely on the right track. And I'm just excited because I know that every one of you is probably going to take some part of this conversation to other conversations in your life or other, parts of your day or whatnot. And I think that is so awesome.
Thank you. And we have a few more minutes, so I do have like 1 or 2 more questions. And I also think that if you are comfortable with it, we can send out your information to those who are signed up for the event as well, so that they can contact you or follow you. And also, in terms of being part of the conversation, this is, just one webinar of a month-long project that we've been taking on. And so if you do want to continue in the conversation in how women and girls have been affected by COVID-19 and also just the struggles that they face overall, you can head to our website that Shara put in the chat. That is also where we're going to eventually put the recordings of all of these webinars, including this one. And so for those who, I know we've had a little bit of rocky start. And so for those who maybe weren't able to join us because we were being a little bit more cautious about who we let in, they can access that on the website when we're all finished. So Shira put in the chat a great question about how can we help incarcerated women feel less alone? Like, are there ways we can communicate with them? And is that a way that we can help create, like, I know there's different parts of making change and changing and taking action. And like one of them is pushing reforms to change the system. And the other one is just like helping people like individually. So I guess that's my question is like, is that a good way? And how can
Yeah, I think one obvious thing, and Cynthia might have some thoughts as well, but one thing that comes to mind for me is what I've heard from directly impacted women is that while they're in the system, knowing that people are fighting for them, it makes a really big difference to know that there are people who are at the Capitol, speaking on their behest because they're not able. The system is designed to be so not transparent, and it really does exist to stifle the voices of those who are being impacted by it. So incarcerated people, they don't have a lot of opportunities to have their voices be elevated in the free world, right? And so having people who can speak for them, especially other formerly incarcerated women who have such an understanding of their experiences, supporting them in changing laws at the state level, in changing policies at the local level, in having articles written or reports and different things like that. Just knowing that there are people fighting for them goes a really, really long way. So I would just say support any initiatives like this one that seeks to elevate the experiences of directly impacted women. And another thing is the reason why we're really excited about our Warriors from Within project is because we want to really include incarcerated women in the process of like holding the system accountable, right? We want to make sure that we we're respecting them as the experts that they are, and we're allowing them to be as much a part of this conversation as anybody else. And so being able to have regular conversations with them where they're writing in about conditions and feeling like they're holding the system accountable from the inside, I think also is going to help a lot to having them feel like they're a part of the solution. And then I would say also just to please support things that would keep women out of the system. So please support mental health treatment, drug treatment in the community, trauma recovery centers, any decarceration initiatives like the drug reform, marijuana legalization, right? Like treating low-level drug possession as a public health issue and not as a criminal justice issue. All of those things are going to have a disproportionate impact on women because they are so heavily impacted by the war on drugs. And so those are women's justice issues. Bail reform, please support bail reform. Cash bail really disproportionately impacts women who are less likely to be able to afford monetary bond and who have lower incomes typically when they're coming into contact with the system than their male counterparts. And so they're more likely to be detained on a low-level monetary bond. That's exactly how Sandra Bland lost her life, right? She was detained on a $500 bond amount for BS reason. And it happens all the time. And so support bail initiatives and say, I'm supporting this because women are disproportionately impacted by this. And we have resources like on our website at texascjc.org/women's-justice, or you can just go to our main page and tab down to our Women's Justice Campaign. We have reports there that have information about how all of these things disproportionately impact women that can give you talking points and stuff like that. So I would just say really, really support initiatives that would help keep women out of the system in the first place. I think that's what would do them the most good, honestly.
Yes, and I would support everything that Lindsay said and just amplify to be involved and support us on the bail reforms, on the conditions of confinement, and that helps women know that they're not alone. I'm a formerly incarcerated woman, so when you know that somebody is out there fighting for change, when you know that your voice is not being silenced, when you know that you are being heard because somebody is advocating on your behalf, that gives you hope. And sometimes in places like that, all you have to hold on to is hope. So the things that we're doing out here for them, they may be very small to us, but they have a significant impact on them. Get involved in your communities and if things are being passed so that resources can go into the community for transitional housing or education for young women, people who just don't have it, vocational. Be involved in that, help sign off on these things so that it can be a part of it. If you're well educated and you have spare time on your hands, especially with COVID-19 and everything is Zoom, volunteer your time and help somebody with literacy, help a child, be a mentor, because sometimes these people don't have good guidance around them, not because someone doesn't want to, because they weren't guided correctly. So they're unable to give this out to their children. They're unable to give this out to their community. So if those of us who possess these talents will give that out and nurture our community, society as a whole will benefit from it.
And super, super quick, I know we have like no time, but I just want to say really quickly, that made me think that I really should take this opportunity to elevate some of the direct service providers that are in our Women's Justice Coalition, because, we do the policy work, but we're not boots on the ground serving these women directly most of the time. And it's not like, there's not often a ton of like volunteer opportunities with TCJC unless you're a student that's interested in policy and you want to come work on like a report or, passing legislation. But there are partners in our Women's Justice Coalition who are doing amazing direct service work that you can support, you can volunteer, you can donate. So really quick, just 3 of those that come to my mind. So Zendaya Ministries is one direct service organization. They do 2 amazing things, one at Christmas time and one in the summer. And both, so during, basically they do in the Christmas time, they do these big hygiene packages for every single woman. They were in 5 facilities last year, which is like thousands of women. And they do like full size shampoo and conditioner and all these different hygiene products, which is like gold, when you have access to like the little commissioned bar of soap that they give you that's terrible. And so they do these big hygiene packages and they send hand-done Christmas cards and like kisses and letters, and like just to like a package to a woman to know that she's loved at Christmas time can make the difference literally between whether she survives another, year until her parole hearing or not, right? Like they need this hope and encouragement. And so that's so amazing. And then in the summer they do cooling towels, because a lot of these units don't have AC and it's deadly and it's horrific. And so they do like basically cooling initiatives to send products into the women to help them cool down. And so anyway, those are 2 really cool things that they do. They're also building a bunk house for women who are transitioning out of the system. Housing is a huge issue for women coming out of prison. So I'm so excited about their bunk house, and we need more housing for women. So they do amazing things. They're faith-based, and the woman who started the ministry, her name is Hannah Overton, and she was actually wrongfully incarcerated in a maximum security prison for 7 years until she was exonerated. And her story is on Discovery ID, and she's amazing. Anyway, so they're awesome. And then I wanted to say, Truth Be Told, they are a nonprofit that basically uses storytelling and creative writing as healing for women who are incarcerated. And they have a whole community. They support the women while they're incarcerated and then also in reentry, and like so many incredible organizations that I know, so many incredible formerly incarcerated women that I know went through Truth Be Told and valued it so much, and it meant a lot to them. And right now they've really shifted 100% of their stuff to letter writing, because they're not able to go into the facilities right now, and they've just been trying to like do everything they can to still be here for these women. So they're really amazing. And then the last one I'll mention is one called Girls Embracing Mothers. It was actually founded by Brittany Barnett, whose mom was incarcerated when she was younger. And she's actually Kim Kardashian's attorney. She's like the most Hollywood person that I know. She actually has a memoir coming out in a month, and I think she's going to be like a New York Times bestseller, but she's amazing. And she started this organization because she understood from a personal perspective what it feels like to have a mother that's incarcerated, right? And so they take girls from Dallas and bus them to facilities to visit their moms for 4 hours a month, which is like an unheard of amount of time to spend with your mom. And they do all kinds of like crafts and bonding projects and all kinds of healing. And it is really transformative for both the mothers and the daughters to be able to maintain those connections while they're incarcerated. And when the women are released, they have reentry programs. They hire some of the women. They do amazing, amazing stuff with them. They go to camp all together. It's so beautiful. It's so amazing. So definitely support Girls Embracing Mothers if you can. And I think they're just always looking for people to support, especially if you maybe are in the Dallas area. But anyways, those are just some folks that you might want to look into if you really are just chomping at the bits to like get involved and support any kind of initiatives that are really going to directly impact women in the short term.
Thank you so much. And thank you both. Like, this has been an amazing conversation. We're running out of time. So I just wanted to say, going to the the point that you guys talked about, how like supporting women and engaging with the women who are affected and incarcerated or previously incarcerated is so important, and because we learn a lot about like facts, for example, numbers and statistics, and obviously those are important and are necessary, but women in general are not believed in their experiences, especially Black women, especially in health, in the criminal justice system. And so sometimes you don't necessarily need to know how many of this is going on and how much of this. You just need to actually believe the person who's in front of you telling you that this is happening and this happened to me. So I think that's very important. This is not, I appreciate everyone for coming. I know for me, it felt like it went very quickly. It's not the end of the conversation or the action. I'm all for like dialogue and conversations and learning, but that's only the first step. And then you've gotten so many resources during this panel to actually take that next step and take action or support the things that TCJC and all the other awesome organizations that you mentioned, Lindsay, are doing. If you do want to take a step monetarily, if you go to our Eventbrite link that you originally signed up for, you can donate, and that money is going to all the organizations that are helping in this month-long webinar series. So if you want to help TCJC and all the other organizations that are going on, like that are helping us with this informative month, you can reallocate and put your money there. And so I also want to apologize again for this disruption at the beginning of this event. I know even though it's been like 4 months, we're still trying to work out all the kinks of online events. So I want to thank you all for your patience. Thank you again to Lindsay and Cynthia for your words and your time. I really appreciate it. I know everyone here does too. And all the resources that have been shared this past hour, we will be collecting them and sending them out to you if you register for the event. So don't worry about like scribbling furiously of like what everything's been said. And don't forget to check out our website that has future events that we're going to be doing. The next event will be, I don't know if she actually wants to put that in the chat because I don't know the details. It's in the chat, just kidding. And you can find there not only future events, but also resources and recordings of all of this and just general information about Girl Up and what we do. So there's also the blog that we're running. You can actually submit your own writing and artwork to be posted on that blog. So if you're someone who wants to get involved or wants to share your voice, feel free to use the contact form. There's all the instructions on the website. So thank you so much, Lindsay and Cynthia. Thank you, everybody. And I will let everyone go unless Lindsay or Cynthia have any last words that they want to say.
No, just thank you so much for having us. It was our pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much for having us.
All right. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.
Bye.